first of all, I just want to, I was very disturbed last week. I went to an opening of an open house of the Ministry of Gender Affairs, of which some of you may know I was appointed as Special Envoy for Women and Girls. And Minister Kudre made what I thought was a very alarming statement, and it seems that like speaking the truth has gone out of style. She said that the policy is before a committee of cabinet, Finance and General Purposes Committee, and that this was the first time that the policy in all of its history had gotten to cabinet, and that is not true. And she knows that that is not true. In fact, this morning I went onto the archives of the Trinidad and Tobago Government News of this 8th of February 2010, which says, Cabinet accepts draft national policy on gender development. It wasn't any media people who wrote this. This came out of the government news. I've said that this is the last time in Trinidad and Tobago I am going to speak about this national policy. I am done. Because I was there in 1988, before some of you were born, when Margaret Hector was the Minister of Women's Affairs. They hadn't invented gender as yet. And I have here, and Margaret went to an OS meeting on women's affairs. And she took with her what she said was a draft national policy for women in Trinidad and Tobago. I remember, I can't find a copy of it now, but it was a single page, letter size, folded in half, printed in brown ink. And when I saw it, I said, Margaret, what is this? How can you write a policy for women in Trinidad and Tobago and take it to Washington without saying anything to those of us who are here? And in fact, what you presented there was not a policy. But what we will do is we will write you a document, and I have the document here, is 1988. It is 13 pages in which we try to inform Ms. Hector what a national policy on women should be, what it should contain, what should be its objectives, what are the issues it should cover, what are the mechanism that was required for its implementation. 13 pages, 1988. And I also found an Express newspaper clipping of 1990, which says the government policy on women was among the items on the agenda of the National Planning Commission this week. All right. So we went from 1988, stumbling along, 90s. 90s, we were engaged in the UN conventions on women. Until, and it was just going nowhere. Of course, in between there, we had several changes of government. In 2002, however, the gender policy picked up some steam because there was money. And money is a very important thing. One of the reasons maybe why it's not going anywhere now is because there is no money. I came upon a history of the gender policy that was done by the Division of Gender Affairs, which takes the trouble of outlining systematically from 2002, because the reason why the history of the gender policy now is written from 2002 was two things. It was because it was money, and by that time, gender had been discovered. Gender had been invented. Money was put into it, and a team from this campus produced a draft policy document which was submitted to Cabinet. In 2004, but they had started to work on it in 2002. They'd work all through 2003, and with the consultations, and they had presented it, and it went to Cabinet. Cabinet minute number 1931, dated the 26th of July 2007. The note was referred to Finance and General Purposes Committee for consideration. We're going around in circles now, right? In 2009, Cabinet approved that the document be laid as a green paper in Parliament. Now, this document was available to the minister when she made the statement that this round of her government's intervention, it was the first time it was going to Cabinet. So you can take that however you want to take that. So history is being reinvented to include what people want to include and to leave out what they want included, and to take us round again the mulberry bush. Because we're now being told that and I was there again, 2011, a cabinet-appointed committee was asked to look at a green paper which had emerged out of the cabinet decision of 2009, and to come up by March of 2012 for International Women's Day, we thought it was going to be, with a statement about what was to be done and what was the text. We found that the 2009 text was not acceptable because it had been re-engineered between 2005 when Patrick Manning said he was not going to, it was not going to be implemented, and 2009 when Marlene McDonald came up with this thing. We said we can't use that 2009. There's no use. That is the one I think that is still up on the government website. We went back to the 2004 document because the problem with the 2004 document, while it said all of the things it should have said, it was not in the language of policy. And that was why Joan Yule Williams, to defend her defend the PNN's position of not carrying forward the policy, said what was presented to her was not a policy, it was a report on the policy. And to a certain extent that was true, because the language of that thing was not policy language about what, and policy would expect to say what the government must do, what the other stakeholders must do, and how it should be done. And so we spent 6 months from November of 2011 till June of 2012 going through another round of consultation with stakeholders to come up with a policy document in the language of policy. And this was the document that Verna St. Rose Graves took to Cabinet in July of 2012. And then there was a change of minister, and we started going around the mulberry bush again. And as we had said earlier, before it went to Finance and General Purposes, well, we were told it was sent to Finance and General Purposes, and Finance and General Purposes is a place where you send things to die. When they go there, they don't normally come back out except somebody goes and rescues it. All right. And then there's all kinds of newspaper articles and all kinds of statements about why we need a policy, what is a policy. Recently, however, one other thing I want to interject. In 2007, the Emmanuel Committee, a committee of the Catholic Church, submitted to Mr. Manning a flyer that we have here that says the dangers of Trinidad and Tobago gender policy and action, which I think is a useful document because it defines exactly what the present objections to the gender policy are. And those relate to the definition of gender and something about a gender policy being an instrument of radical feminists to destroy marriage and family. That is their mantra. Radical feminists want to use gender policy to destroy marriage and families. And they came up with their own definition of gender, which she said is part of the problem, and that is that gender, and they found a definition that they had been trying to introduce since 1995, and that is gender is simply a man and a woman and nothing else. And they found what they say is the only legally binding definition of gender. And every time I hear that, I say, you see, I was one of the people who back in 2002 says, why don't we have a policy for women? This gender story is going to get us into a whole lot of places from which it might be difficult to recover. They, however, found a definition of gender that suits the Roman Catholic Church, the Holy See, which you know is a nation of the United Nations and participates in all of the international areas. And this is a definition of gender which suits the purpose of the International Criminal Court. Court was being established in 2000. Interestingly, is a court that was initiated by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And the negotiations for the court included two issues. One of them was the extent to which people could have access to the court for matters related to their sexual orientation, in which the Roman Catholic Church, as you could well imagine, had a great interest, that those people would not be allowed, and they are not now allowed, to take their cases to the International Criminal Court on the basis of that definition. They were also opposed to a proposal of the court that there should be gender balance in the appointment of judges and staff of the court. And the church opposed that, and they lost that one. But they did, and we've seen all the documentation of the process of the arguments about the definition, and they won that one. And that is the only place, international area, in which you will find a definition of gender which says it's the same as sex. The question is that we are now asking, and I hope some of you will ask as well, is that what is the relevance of a definition that is developed for the purpose of an international criminal court and its export worldwide to anywhere? Because a definition must suit the purpose of the cause or the institution. But that's where we seem to be stuck now. That is what has recently been presented to the Minister Kudri as their argument against cabinet approval of a gender policy, which includes a definition which all of us knew. All right, I don't know if some of you in this room knew what, can tell me, help me with a definition of gender that you know. Anybody? What is gender? Anybody? What is gender?
Gender is the societal construct of performance of roles between the sexes. It's how society perceives a person is supposed to act, supposed to behave, and supposed to their demeanor they're supposed to have.
Isn't that simple? You think it's possible for that to have a problem in understanding? I don't think so. But that is what we have now been told is the reason why we don't have a policy, gender policy in Trinidad and Tobago, which everybody knows is foolishness. So we went now, I've gone myself personally on the track of that argument, since this is the only obstacle between a policy that we've been working with and being massaged through various incarnations to approval. The new chairman of the FNGP is Larry UWI. So I go to Mr. UWI and I say, Larry boy, I need some help here. I understand you're the chairman of this thing. Tell me how we get it out of there. He says, okay. He sends me back an email. And I don't know if it's a fake email, right? But he sent me an email. He sent me an email. Larry says, Brown, the policy is not before the FNGP. Policy is before something that is called an interministerial committee, and I will send you the names of the members. Because my intention was to get an opportunity to make a presentation on what is this gender definition story is about. Anyway, in the meantime, I go back through my records and I see the letter that was received by Minister Kudri, which initiated this latest round of stalling of the policy. The letter, written by one Miss Ramdeen, signed by the Archbishop of Port of Spain, requesting an opportunity to speak to the issue of the definition and this family story, was addressed to one Jack Warner. It wasn't addressed to the Prime Minister, it wasn't addressed to the Cabinet, it wasn't addressed to the Minister of Gender Affairs. It was addressed to Mr. Warner, and it says, thanks for the opportunity to make an intervention. You see, there's no reason why we should be here talking about this, right? Because there are people out there who could simply provide an opportunity for intervention, and that's it. I am hopeful, and I hope that it will happen, that now that Mr. Warner is no longer in that position of influence, that the policy may get released from the prison in which it now is. All right, so I've asked for some help. I have also asked for help from Madam Justice Desiree Bernard on the issue of the applicability of a definition of gender which was designed for a court to a gender policy in Trinidad and Tobago, anywhere else in the world for that matter. And she says simply the answer is, ask them applicable, legally binding, on whom? So I have since written to the dear President of the Republic, who, as you all know, is a former member of that court, for his advice about the applicability of the definition of gender in the International Criminal Court to the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago's national gender policy. I have not yet received a reply from His Excellency, but I expect that I will. In the meantime, I want to go to what we should do. I know what I am going to do. This is the last time I am speaking. I may take some other action, but this is the last time I'm going to speak. Because I think that in Trinidad and Tobago, it have too much talk. They have too much talk. This gender policy of June 2000 of June 2012, in my view, is an acceptable policy document, which, as our T-shirt for International Women's Day says, everyone needs a gender policy. It is what will determine the removal of discrimination against women and girls that exists in employment, in the health sphere, in everywhere that you go on the street in Trinidad and Tobago. And it requires not more talk, but some action. One proposal about action is that we set out on our own course of developing a National Commission on Women, which will be charged to do the things that are intended to be done in that document. And interestingly, which we had included in our 1988 document, which recommended the creation of a National Commission on Women as part of the national machinery, that there would be a Gender Affairs Division, a state entity responsible for what the government does, but that there would also be a national plan of action and the creation of a National Commission on Women based on a model of a National Commission of Women in India, which you might find if you search National Commission on Women in India. Interestingly, the Minister of Gender Affairs of India is coming to Trinidad and Tobago on the 28th of May on the 1st of June. And in her delegation is the woman who is the chair of the Indian National Commission on Women. And one of the things that I will do is to ensure that there is a forum in which she has the opportunity to share with us how the National Commission on Women in India works, to the extent that it would be useful for us to create our own National Commission on Women in Trinidad and Tobago. I want to stop there because, quite frankly, as long as there are people like Jack Warner and Anil Roberts in the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago, you're wasting time. Wasting time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hazel.